Greetings and welcome back to another episode of the Daily Run, and today we're playing as Apollyon. I haven't felt like I played Apollyon in the longest time, so it's nice to get a refresher of things. The first few times I've played him, especially on daily runs, he didn't feel too spectacular, but now, after all this time, I feel like I've gotten used to him, so I know maybe how the Void works just a little bit better, and I know his strengths and weaknesses. I would say that the Void is actually a really strong item, and not because you can suck up the active items, although that definitely helps, but because of its passive item capability. The fact that you can turn any passive item, and there's so many bad passive items in the game, and turn it into a stats upgrade, and you know it's a guaranteed stats upgrade. On the average you're gonna get something like +1 damage. That's pretty good, and the fact you can do that with any item that basically you get either from a boss room, and the fact that sometimes you can even suck up multiple items, I think it really puts this item on a pedestal. It just makes it amazing. You know, you never would expect one item to give you something like a 2 damage upgrade, even though some items obviously do exist, they're very rare, but the Void does that no problem. But not just that, it also gives you range, it also gives you luck, it also gives you tear delay, but on average I would say that it gives you more than just plus 2 damage, and the fact you can keep it alongside with the other active items that you get just puts this item on a level on its own. I would definitely argue that this is one of the best items in the game as it is. Sure, you know, it's still a bit, maybe, how would I put it? It does rely on luck somewhat, because you need to get those items that you can suck up, obviously, and early on especially, maybe you don't have enough charges to do that, and it definitely takes some time to get going. It's very situational, I guess that's what I'm trying to say, and it definitely doesn't work on every run, but I would say that on average, I would much rather have this item than not to have it, and especially with all the items that appeared in this particular case, I just decided to suck them up. I would much rather have a stats upgrade in the average case than something like Little Steven, even though I really like Little Steven. I think an extra helping hand there is usually pretty good, but the fact that I can just decide I don't want this item, I think it makes my life too miserable, then I can decide to suck it up, and I think that decision of power is what makes Apollyon, or at least the Void, really good. So alongside that, you can see that at this point I don't really have that many items. I've decided to suck most of them up, and I didn't really get that good of a stats in return. I got some shot speed upgrade. I think that's definitely the worst part, because just the fact you get a random stats up, it's possible that you get some other stat before you start getting things like damage and tear delay, and maybe even luck. But with shot speed especially, because it caps out so fast, and because of how fast it increases every time you get a shot speed upgrade from a Void up-sucking guy, you just need 2 or 3 to be really in a territory where it becomes kind of hard to shoot, because your tears are way too fast, you can't really angle them properly, and the fact is that they knock enemies around and actually becomes much harder to hit them. So it's that position where at the same time you want to keep using it just to suck up more items, because you know eventually you're gonna get a damage up, but at the same time it's also quite tedious and quite annoying to actually make it happen, just because those things like getting a lot of shot speed can occur, and that's a bit of a bummer. One maybe unsung hero of this run on why I think the Void is great is we had a Forget-Me-Now. Now, obviously in a lot of situations you want to keep the Forget-Me-Now as a separate active item, and you want to carry it to the end of the floor, but obviously that is kind of restricting yourself, because you can't keep any other active items in that case. You have to stick with that. Even though it gives you some breaking potential, you can obviously get a lot more exploration bonus that way, you're still very restricted, and I generally don't like whenever a run goes that way. I decided I want to stick with the Void, and what's really great about it is that I can suck up the Forget-Me-Now with the Void. I get the usage out of it. Admittedly, I did only explore the second floor, which is probably not the most optimal use, but it's still an extra floor, and the best thing about it is I can keep my Void to use on other active items or passive items later down the road. And if this run was maybe any stronger, if I got something like Brimstone maybe, I would consider it. I would just say, forget the Void, I'm gonna take the Forget-Me-Now, I'm gonna use it on Mom's cart, or whichever floor is the last. I'll get the maximum usage out of that, and maybe some way I'll be able to break the game, and maybe that's how I would go about it. But in this particular case, because this run was actually relatively weak, I wanted to get use of Void, just because I think I already had some pretty fun synergies at that point. I picked up the Crystal Ball, and the Crystal Ball with the Void is obviously pretty great, because that means you essentially just have the Crystal Ball, and any other active item that you get on top of that just makes it that much better. So I decided to stick with it. It turned out to be pretty well. It was one of those staple Apollyon runs that I expected I would get whenever I would play Apollyon, but it turned out that maybe it doesn't really turn out that way always, just because some active items really don't work well. A lot of the active items don't even have charges, they're maybe like passive items, And what's maybe even worse is that a lot of the active items, even though they work or maybe have less charges, the fact that they are a 2-charge item, something like Shoop the Whoop, makes them unusable with the Void, because you would usually want to use the Void obviously whenever you can get the maximum efficiency, but if you have something like Shoop the Whoop on a 6-round charge, it's probably a good bet that if you have some other active items, you're not going to be using it offensively. So I'm just talking about that. It's maybe not the best are those small active items which really maybe don't do as much, but it's really great with items like Book of Shadows maybe, or the one I mentioned before, the Crystal Ball and things like that. It's just, it does work well, and thankfully in this particular case we did get all of those items, and I really did have a really fun run going for myself. One thing that I noticed that I never maybe considered is Compost, and Compost is a 2-room charge, and what it does is translates or changes every single consumable on the floor into the flies and spiders and gives them to you, and what it also does is doubles all of the flies and spiders that you already have, and just gives you another batch of them as well. And you can imagine that this is a really strong item. You can see how many spiders I have, and the fact is this is basically a 6-room charge instead of a 2-room charge, and it's still proving to be one of the best items that I've picked up on this whole run as it is. Of course I do have some damage upgrades from the Void itself and the Light Bulb, but just the fact I've never actually attributed Compost to being such a good item. Obviously we know items like Guppy's Head or maybe the Jar of Flies are okay, they can help to clear rooms with a lot of efficiency, but how many times do you get a heart upgrade which you really can't pick up, or maybe some other consumable which you don't really want? And the ability to transform that into something tangible and usable with Compost I think is great, but obviously because you do rely on some other active items, especially in dailies, so when you get something like the blank card you really don't want to let that go. It doesn't get that much use, but the fact I actually was able to make it useful in this particular run, and even though it was on a 6-room charge, it did prove to be really strong and really powerful, and I actually enjoyed kind of traversing and doing my best as I was going through the whole shenanigans with breaking and whatnot. One thing that I noticed on this particular run is, or not noticed, but I was worried that I wasn't gonna get to boss rush, and I decided, you know, maybe I always try to make it to boss rush. I try to rush, I try to make it as fast as I can, and it usually turns out I either make it, obviously, and I still get a decent score, but I know a lot of people who take their time, do the full exploration bonus, and then just get Mama Mega, and that way obviously you get both the benefits of going to boss rush and exploring the whole entirety of the floor before. And I picked up Chaos, so I thought maybe Mama Mega shows up, but obviously the chances of it showing up in the shop is a lot less likely now, because every time you go into the shop you're gonna get a random item instead of a shop item, and because Mama Mega is a shop item, that means that on average I think I've reduced my chances of it actually showing up. But what happened by some miracle is I played the Devil Deal, I mean the Devil Beggar here, and it gave me a shop item, and not only a shop item, it was exactly Mama Mega, so that was incredibly lucky and something that I would recommend to everyone. It was a very knee-jerk decision I made at some point in the run. I said, you know, I'm not gonna rush, I don't feel like actually rushing. If I miss boss rush, that's fine, but I'm gonna try to get Mama Mega that way and maybe break the game in some form of another, like a lot of other people do it. But what I maybe didn't consider is that I didn't really have any tools to break, so it was much more a luck-based decision and just a very foolish one than anything strategic. If I was playing seriously, or not seriously, if I was trying to actually get a really good score without trying to cheese it, I would just make a rush for it. I wouldn't use the Forget Me Now and do a whole another floor exploration that way. And what's even worse, I didn't get any Devil Deals at the start, so that kind of screwed me over in some regard. I didn't get any offensive items which would help me out. And at that point I just said, you know, whatever. Let's hope that Mama Mega shows up, and if it does, great. If it doesn't, that's not great. And I was starting to lose hope, and what was maybe the biggest kick in the balls, so to say, was that I got Restock as my last item in the shop. And obviously when you buy it, you can't buy any other items, because it was my last item. So I was kind of relying on having one more item in the shop which I could continuously buy, but still I didn't have any way to actually break the game and generate a lot of money, so I wasn't holding out a lot of hope of actually doing that. Now if I wanted to do that, I could have used the Ivy Bag that I got on the previous floor, and with the Ivy Bag, because every time you use it I would get 2 cents because of Humbling Bundle, and obviously that would allow me to buy hearts infinitely, and because you get on average 3 cents every time you use it, I would be 3 cents, yeah, every time you use it you get an average 3 cents, and a heart costs 3 cents, and when you use it for 1 full heart, on average you get 6 cents, which means that we would be had, and also have to consider that every heart we would buy would also be a double heart, so essentially that's a way to generate infinite money, and with that obviously I could force Mama Mega into showing up, I could break the game with Restock, it wouldn't be a problem at all. I decided to not take Ivy Bag because again I wanted to stick with the Void. Maybe that's a bad idea, maybe not, but nevertheless, it did turn out to be the right decision in some sense because I did get Mama Mega later on. Obviously, a very lucky one, nothing strategic here at all. I'm just saying, if you did want to be strategic, you would take the Ivy bag at that point. You would go to the shop later on and you would try to do what I did except without the void. But what was maybe the biggest side effect of this, or maybe the funniest side effect, is that by just buying a lot of things from the shop, I had a bunch of items there and decided at some point, because they really weren't that useful, I'm just gonna suck them up, let's see what happens. And I think I was at something like 10 red hearts, and because I sucked up Guppy's Paw in the process of that, every time I use my void to duplicate my flies and things like that and actually use my crystal ball, I also take 1 red heart away, and in turn that reduces my score by that just tiny margin for not having that red health. So it's a bit silly, it's a bit ridiculous in some sense, but you know, we work with what we have, you really can't expect too much. Obviously I'm not gonna waste all of my potential to break the game just not to use the void later, so I decided to stick with it, and even though I did lose all my red health, I just kept going. Maybe it's a blessing in disguise, because I think there's a boss trap room around here, so being at 1 red health or less did help me get into it. Obviously if I had 10 I wouldn't be able to, unless maybe I found an Ivy bag or the blood bank or something like that, but that didn't happen, so maybe it was a blessing in disguise. And later on I also did become Guppy, so this was just a crazy run. Crazy not in the sense that maybe it was just super powerful, obviously I did have some good synergies going on here, but this was the Apollyon run that I was striving for. I really always wanted to experience Apollyon in its full glory, where you just have a bunch of active items on your void and you just get something ridiculous happen every time you use it, and the fact we just suck up every consumable on the floor, generate flies, drop a card, and that card is then transformed into flies. It's a bit of an anti-synergy, but at least we get a fly. And I also had Guppy's head, so I was just a fly generator, and it felt good to be in this position. And it's one of those things that wouldn't be possible without Afterbirth Plus. So even though a lot of people give it a lot of flack for just not being that fun or maybe that balanced, the fact is that these synergies do exist, and I do think they make the game a lot of fun to play, especially when you can actually make them work the way that this run actually made it work. So that was quite great and quite fun, but I'm nearing the end of this run at this particular point. I hoped it could go on for longer, because obviously exploring the whole entirety of Shoal and the Black Room, not the Black Room, the Dark Room would have been great, because not only would I have the chance to experience some more of this fly madness, but I would also be able to just get a lot more points. I looked at the end scores, it was my mistake, I was trying to look at the Greedbuds like yesterday's scores, and I noticed that the top score is 44,000, so I thought I was actually gonna be much lower than like top 10, but it did turn out that I was in 6th place after I finished this daily, which is just ridiculous. And when you think about it, it does make a lot of sense, because I got a lot of Shrek bonus by just committing, and exploration bonus as well, because I just committed very early on that I'm not gonna try to make it the boss rush, I'm just gonna fully explore every floor and try to get the maximum efficiency possible. And just due to some stroke of luck, I managed to get Mama Mega, and that allowed me to get the boss rush with the whole exploration bonus. Obviously our item penalty is quite higher based on other people, but because item penalty isn't as big of a deal as you would expect, it doesn't really reflect on the end score that much. And of course the fact that we did go to boss rush, and the fact that we had to buy so many items to kind of guarantee or at least increase our chance of getting Mama Mega is maybe a side effect of that. But damage penalty was a bit too high, so that was maybe my only gripe with this run, that I did take a lot of dumb damage. I think this could have been easily at least 2,000 points lower, so I would be at something like 40,000 in the end. But hey, what can you do? Now, this happens. It would have been great if I found the blank card with Jara, but you can have everything that you want every single daily. And I just enjoyed that this daily was what it was, because I really need more dailies like this. Not the ones where I get lucky, but more dailies which are teamed, where you just get a run, you get some crazy combination of items, and you just try to make it work with everything you have. Obviously this did become quite strong towards the end, but early on it was maybe not as powerful, and I did really have to rely on the items that I had and to use them to this fullest efficiency in order to get through, and I really enjoy runs like that. I hope you enjoyed this one, guys, and I hope to see you next time.